Another Founder Wisdom podcast, AI edition with Patrick Monnot, aka Patrick Monnot. We've both spent time in Montreal. He's the founder of Pod, cool AI company. He's based in SF right now, and this week was the SF Tech Week. Reading a bunch of your posts, Pat, on LinkedIn, and this is gonna be a fun conversation. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and Pod?
Yeah, absolutely. Shal, thank you so much for having me. And I'm super excited about our conversation. So, a bit about myself. I'm Patrick, originally from Montreal, Canada. I've been working in the tech space and in the go-to-market space pretty much my whole career. So, I have an engineering background, work a few years in management consulting, where I advised go-to-market teams in large and small and medium tech organizations. And then most recently, what I was at a Series C startup in San Francisco called Zinnier, where I was doing a lot of go-to-market ops work. And I brought a lot of that product and go-to-market experience to what I'm doing at Pod today. And it's been super inspiring and exciting to, bring the world of AI into AE's workflows to help them to perform better and ultimately close more deals faster.
Interesting. Tell us first about your move from Montreal to SF. What was the ROI on that?
Yeah, a very good question. Listen, I think what was interesting for me is Montreal is a very vibrant city from a cultural perspective, from a business perspective, from an AI perspective as well. And it's home for me, obviously. I think what was interesting for me is I needed to do a bit of a change and get closer to where, quote unquote, things were happening in the tech world, right? Uh, Having worked in management consulting, I wasn't necessarily as close to the technology world or innovation, et cetera. So the reason for the move initially was just to be where innovation ideas people were. And I think it really paid off ultimately, meeting incredible people, being at the center of innovation, new technologies. A funny story around that is like this weekend I took my first autonomous vehicle cab. And that was
Wow.
when I reflected with my partner on this, I was like, there's no way in any other city in the world I'll be able to do that. Right. I was
I'm
probably
sold.
amongst the first 1,000 people to do so. And that was incredible. And so both from a job perspective, from a personal perspective, lifestyle perspective, San Francisco has been very, very good to me. So definitely do not regret it.
I think I'll have a foot in there for that exact reason that you mentioned. So that's why
Yeah.
that was one of my thesis. So, and pre-pod, we spoke about like where I'm based being a capital for spirituality, quote unquote,
Hmm.
culture and so forth. Montreal is top of my list also. So
Totally.
I think if you can alternate between all of these cities which have value, and in the end if you have your shit together spiritually and mindset wise, you can make very good money as well. But I think,
Yeah, absolutely.
like having a taste of every part of the buffet is kind of what you need to do. And yeah, the tech in
Yeah,
SF is just huge. Like if you're an early adopter, the value you can get from there is big as a consumer and as a startup founder. So good one for
totally.
that. You and I were talking about physical networking vs like just booking
Hmm.
a bunch of meetings on Zoom, which I think can be super efficient if you know how to do it right. In my case, certainly the case. But can you give us a summary of what you and I talked about pre-pod, like the physical networking vs the online networking?
Yeah, a very good point. I think I have mixed feeling oftentimes about physical networking. I think oftentimes it can lead you to meet great people. I've oftentimes been a bit more of a fan of deeper, more meaningful conversation. And I think I mentioned that a bit earlier, but I'd rather have over the course of a 2 hour networking event, 5 to 10 meaningful conversation where you go beyond the chit chat and the icebreakers. I'd rather have that than, 20, meeting 25 people and having a 1 minute conversation. And I think oftentimes it gets you to meet a lot of interesting people, but you don't get to that second level of interactions and getting to know the other. And I think oftentimes either through Zoom or, social networks like LinkedIn, you get the chance to meet a lot of people, but then also choose where you want to spend your time and jump on a Zoom call, etc. So I think ultimately it's all about balance, and it's a spectrum. I don't think it's only one or the other, but there's definitely upsides and downsides of physical events as well as video conferencing based networking.
Because right
And
now you're
to some extent, Shal, you and I are an example of that, right? Never met in person, met throughout LinkedIn, and we've had a couple of like super interesting conversations so far. So it's a
right.
testament of it being the case as well in the virtual world.
Right. That's what I like about LinkedIn. You know, if you are somewhat of a good communicator, you can put what you're about it in there, like in a fairly short fashion. If you go through I mean, apart from my 54 experiences I put in there, just quite heavy. I think I can, a smart human being can get a sense of my profile in probably 7 seconds, know that I'm all about moonshots, technology, and so forth. So, yeah, that's why we connected. Are you raising at the moment? Like, are you seeking another round?
Yeah, so we're raising a pre-seed right now. We were part of the Bling Capital Fellowship Program for the past few months, which has been amazing in terms of helping us refine our value proposition, pushing on a product, and helping more and more sales team. And now we're excited to accelerate. Since the launch of our AI Copilot 2 months ago or so, the traction has been amazing. The feedback has been amazing. So we're excited to put the pedal to the metal, so to speak, and accelerate our growth and continue to support AE. So we're raising a pre-seed right now.
What do you think about starting a podcast? So having the pretext of a podcast and talking to a bunch of investors. For example, I have my VC Wisdom Pod. By the way, I could possibly introduce you to a couple of folks. But what do you think about starting a podcast and getting 5 to 10 of these pods per day? Then you stop the pod and then you ask them like, "Hey, I'm raising my round. Do you know anyone?" What do you think about that idea?
I think that's definitely a good one. I think it's a great way to get in front of a lot of investors and have conversation, etc. So it's definitely a good way. And I'm a big proponent of content, generally speaking. I think content rules the world, and we're seeing that more and more definitely on LinkedIn. And in the world of sales, people being very active on LinkedIn. So it's kind of like two birds, one stone type of approach where you have three bird, one stone almost. You have meaningful conversation, you meet amazing people, you generate helpful content, and then ultimately has a business value overall. So definitely a big fan of that approach.
Have you talked to the guys of the GTM fund? Because I think I interviewed like probably 10 of them in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I have. So one of our advisors, Neil Weitzman, is an LP at the Go to Market Fund, and I've been talking to the folks over the past few weeks. So Go to Market Fund is an amazing fund, especially being in the go to market space. I think they have north of 200-300 LPs that are CROs, CMOs, VPs of sales and RevOps, etc. So they come with an amazing baggage of experience and expertise in this space. And
I love them.
Yeah.
Tell us about the product itself. First, I like the name Pod. It's one of my favorite words, Pod. I have like 6 domains. I have PodRap, PodLab, PodSap. What else? Podbuyer. So yeah, I love the word pod. Podbuyer is my podcasting company, and these other companies are gonna be like my podcast agency with a twist, obviously. Tell us about your product and why you decided to go into the sales category and add the AI spice to it.
Yeah, very good. I'll give you a bit of background on the problem that we're solving and how I came across it. So during my time, like I mentioned, at McKinsey and at Zinnier, I was involved in enterprise sales deals, myself doing sales ops, sales enablement, selling myself, pitching. And one of the problems that we've encountered and we've experienced is that account executives spend 3/4 of their day on non-selling activities, overwhelmed with tools and information being thrown their way, and it's getting in the way of selling. That's one of the big reasons why more than half of reps don't hit their quota every single year. But rep productivity, what we realized was a known issue, right? We've thrown the whole kitchen sink of solutions at it, and it's doing some pretty positive results, but it's still not getting the whole way. The more fundamental unaddressed problem that we've uncovered is that account executives make avoidable wrong decisions and lose deal because they lack the actionable information and the guidance to know how to push a deal forward. The exciting thing with AI is that it's opened up new opportunities. And what we can do now is up-level workflows by digesting data across different systems and suggesting a path forward to account executives. And that's basically what Pod is all about. So what we do is that we use unique deal data and AI technologies like GPT-4, predictive analytics, clustering, etc., to generate customized sales playbooks for account executives, guiding them on the best actions to close more deals faster. You can think of it a bit like an AI copilot, so to speak, for account executives. Reps get up in the morning, jump into Pod to find a list of prioritized deals. And for each of them, we provide a customized sales playbook for them to take action on, and they go and sell. It's that simple, right? We think about it as a 10x better experience for account executives because they spend more than 2.5x more time selling, but ultimately we improve the way that they sell, and that's what's most important, right? There's a lot of our focus at Pod is on quality over quantity, particularly relevant for enterprise salespeople. We want to improve the quality of your selling by applying better sales plays, by making more informed decisions, by better tailoring your approach and your messaging to your prospect. And that's ultimately how we think that we can improve your win rate, your sales velocity, and ultimately hitting your quota. So it's been the AI twist ultimately is an enabler, like any other tools, to their workflows altogether. And there's this, with the LLMs being more and more popular, more and more accessible and reliable, it opens up amazing and super interesting use cases that weren't really possible to address 6 months or a year ago.
And yeah, like talking about that, tell us, how does that integrate with the current climate of things, which is that 29% of account execs reach their quota and the sales cycle is elongated by, I think, 50+%. How would that solve that problem? And do you think it's possible to get back to the 2020 stats?
Listen, there's obviously a contextual market dynamics happening that where demand is lower, everyone's budget is being tightened, decision making process is longer. So there's definitely that aspect, which is very contextual to our time, and hopefully, knock on wood, we're getting out of that recessionary environment in the next year or so. But the problem, even in 2020, weren't great stats neither. Like I mentioned, it was 50% of account executives who missed their quota. Obviously, 30% is not great, but 50% is not great neither. The way we think about solving that problem ultimately is through two things, right? On one end, productivity, helping AEs to spend more time on things that matter, which is understanding their prospects, researching their prospect, following up with them, preparing a demo, etc., rather than low value admin work. But ultimately, by surfacing to them relevant information to help them to have a more informed conversation and better prioritize their time or be better prepared ahead of a conversation. I'll give you a very specific use case of how we do that, right? Research on accounts and contacts takes a big chunks of account executives' day, right? They spend time on Google News or on LinkedIn or a bunch of other on the World Wide Web, so to speak, to try to understand what's the latest and greatest, right? It can be helpful to have just a great conversation starter, but ultimately maybe to know what is a compelling event for that contact or account to use your product or purchase from you, right? Part of what we do is that we consolidate information about your contacts and accounts across the World Wide Web. So an example is that we're pulling the latest 20 different articles about an account, right? It's OpenAI or Amazon, etc. We'll pull the latest 20 different articles, surface that to you, give you a sense of the sentiment analysis, whether it's a positive, neutral, or a negative article, but then we'll apply large language models, GPT-4, to analyze the content of the articles and extract compelling events across different categories, obviously, whether it's business operations, legal issues, policy issues, et cetera, et cetera. So in this way, going back to my point, we're able to, first of all, shrink the amount of time that AEs have to do to research and dig up information, and we could guide them on interesting cue points for their next conversation or things that might be relevant for them to point out in an outreach email or in a follow-up email. So part of that is, and part of Pod and our AI Copilot is about surfacing alerts, recommendation, guidance, information to help them ultimately to push through a deal faster and get it closer to closure faster. So that addresses the point about win rate, but ultimately the point about sales velocity as well.
Love it. What's the price tag on that?
Yeah, good question. So right now, the product is free to use. We're launching a pro version in the next 6 months, but it will be around $30 to $50 per user per month. And we work already with a lot of high growth tech organization and have a lot of account executives, VPs of sales, head of RevOps who are working with us. But we're excited to launch kind of the pro version with access to additional features, a lot of AI powered features as well. And I think that's going to continue to expand the impact and the value that we're delivering to reps.
So I had a quick question before we finish the pod. How did you meet your co-founder, and how do you split responsibilities and make sure that like everyone's doing their part?
Yeah, good question. Our founding engineer Andrew, he's jumped on board about, I think it's been a little north of 8 months ago, back in I think in September or October of last year, and he really heads a lot of our engineering effort. So there's kind of a clear cut. I come in with a background in product, in go to market, so I lead everything that is not engineering related. But Andrew really is the chief architect, obviously chief engineer, to think about our product and how to improve it and how to deliver on some of the use cases. So there's oftentimes a lot of a clear cut, so to speak, in responsibilities, but we do collaborate quite closely in order to get visibility on both sides on what's going on and be able to inform on each other, to make sure priorities are aligned.
And did you knew Andrew before, or how did you find him?
Oh, I did not. So it was through Andrew. Andrew's not our co-founder. He's a founding engineer. So he's, so to speak, our first employee to jump on board. So we met through, I think, through LinkedIn. He's also from Montreal. Comes with a great baggage. So when we had our first few conversation, I could definitely see the flame in his eye and his excitement for the space and the technology. And I think it's been amazing.
And how many of these convos did you had? Because usually it's quite hard to convince people to jump in a startup with like no revenue and take these big risks. So is it a numbers game? Like I'm still looking for a playbook to hire, technical co-founders just like that. Well, founding engineers like that.
Yeah, good question. I don't think it's a numbers game. Ultimately, the profile of people you're looking for at such an early stage is different from even when it's a company of 50 people, right? So I've taken a very kind of proactive, almost sales prospecting angle to recruiting, where I look at different profiles of people on LinkedIn or on AngelList or whatnot, and I proactively reach out. And that's what happened with Andrew. I reached out to Andrew. He was this company for some time, had a super interesting entrepreneurial background, and it ended up being a good conversation. Obviously, you need to go through multiple conversations. That's the world of hiring people. But I'd rather, go after people that I think could be a great fit than spraying and praying and having 50 conversation where ultimately the person doesn't have any interest or it's not a good fit. So I try to
So
put all chances on my end and
I think I had
have a
my
very good
insight there,
idea
which
on.
is like
Yeah.
ex-founder. So there's this function on Apollo in which you can target ex-founders. So I'm gonna launch these campaigns to work with to hire salespeople, but also like
Yeah.
technical folks, right? I think that's powerful. So thank you for that. Where
Yeah,
can
that's a super good point. I take the same approach to, it's a little bit like the same approach in sales, right? You define your ICP and then you go after it. Same thing in hiring. Look for your profile and then you go after it.
where can people find out more about you and Pod, Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely on LinkedIn, to know about myself, to connect. I've always loved connecting with people in the world of startup technology, AI, go to market. But to know more about Pod, work with pod.com. It's our main website. A lot of helpful information, and people can sign up for free, and it takes less than a minute.